One. Hello, folks. We're live for the second time today. Big day, two broadcasts or broadcasts, if you will. This time we're with Emily Sweeney, longtime Globe reporter and longtime friend. And we'll talk about where we met after this. But this being a soundbite society, we want to get to the point right away. There's a story about a guy who robbed a bank and got away with it. And Emily's going to tell you that story. A local guy, keeping it local. And Emily is a Globe reporter in general, but in a way, she's a kind of a crime reporter as well. And you write crime books as well. Tell me just about the crime stuff you write.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on, Bradley.
Yes.
I've been at the Globe now for just over 20 years, and I have a crime column that comes out every Sunday called Blotter Tales. And what I do is I find like funny stuff from like police logs, and I put it together in a column that comes out every week. And then I also write about organized crime. I have two books out currently, Gangland Boston, and the other one is called Boston Organized Crime.
I want to point out that you took me on a tour of the North End and point out some of these gangland spots.
Yeah, that was fun. We need to do that again, actually.
Yeah, that was fun. Okay. And so this was right up your alley, to be cliche, this is in your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
We have a story of a dude who I guess I don't have to say allegedly because he copped to it. He admitted it, right? I mean, you don't say allegedly in your article, do you? I mean, he admitted it.
Yeah. I mean, he did it. It's a fascinating story. So there's a guy, Tom Rendell, who was an upstanding citizen in Linfield, really charismatic guy.
Did you say Linfield with an L?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And so that's where he lived for years. With his wife, his kid, knew everybody in town. His wife actually worked for the town of Linfield for many years. Always known to be like a very friendly guy, organizing golf outings and whatnot. So he died earlier this year, and in May. And at home, like deathbed confession, he told his wife and daughter, guess what? I'm not Tom Rendell.
So he got married under his assumed new name?
Yeah. So it's a fascinating story. So let's rewind quick. 52 years ago.
Yeah.
Are you with me?
I am.
Okay. 52 years ago, Ted Conrad was just turned 20 years old. Now, this is the future Tom Rendell. But so Ted Conrad, the day after his 20th birthday, he was working as like a vault teller at a bank in Cleveland. And, he had just seen like a movie called The Thomas Crown Affair.
Right.
Which is about, robbing banks. And, he saw how the bank operated. He's like, you know what? I think I could like actually walk out with a ton of money and get away with it. So it was like the day after his 20th birthday, at the end of his shift, he apparently walks out with like a brown paper bag of sorts full of cash. He walks out. Now, remember, these are banking hours, right? So nobody even notices, the vault teller left with all with a whole bunch of cash. The bank's closed Saturday, closed Sunday. The bank doesn't realize, hey, where's Ted? He didn't show up for work on Monday.
Right.
Boom.
So where did the cash come from? Out of the drawer?
My guess is that it came from the vault. I can't be sure. I don't, I'm not sure on that detail. But he left with the equivalent of what would be over $1.5 million today.
In a paper bag?
Yes. Inflation, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
It was I think it was like 215 grand, but back then, you could buy a house for,
Yeah.
So, again, the equivalent of about 1.6 million today, he walked out with. And
yeah.
So right now investigators are trying to figure out, how he ended up in Massachusetts. But it seems like he went to a couple places around the country, maybe just airports. He wrote a couple postcards to his or letters to his girlfriend saying, look, there's a statute of limitations.
Is
I'll be back.
how long? I mean, the statute of limitations has got to be pretty long.
Well, unfortunately, he had it wrong too, because so he thought at the time it would be like a few years, like maybe 6 years or something. And what happened was a few months later, he got indicted for the crime, and the U.S. Marshal Service told me, once you're indicted for something like this, there is no statute of limitations.
Oh,
So anyway, so he ends up in Massachusetts, right? So in Boston in 1970. Like a lot of people were like, how did he change his name? How did he get a new ID and stuff? Here's how he did it. I think it was like January 1970, walks into the Social Security Administration building in Boston and pretty much just says, hey, I'm Tom Rendell. I live in an apartment on Commonwealth Avenue. I never got a Social Security number. And back then in 1970, or at least I'm told, that wasn't that, uncommon. There were a lot of people that didn't get assigned numbers, and so they gave him one. And then from there, he got a driver's license and started his new life as Tom Rendell. He got a job working as a golf pro at the Pembroke Country Club on the South Shore, and then kind of played the pro circuit in the off season down in Florida. And I talked to people who knew him back then, and they were kind of shocked. Just because like he didn't flash a lot of money around or anything, but everybody knew him as a really friendly guy, always up for having fun. Yeah, so
easygoing guy. So this was modeled after, or at least inspired by, the Thomas Crown affair.
Yeah. And honestly, that might have been the reason why he ended up in Boston. I was talking to, again, one of the investigators and from the U.S. Marshal Service. And, some of the apartments where he lived at were very close to places where they filmed the Thomas Crown affair.
Where did he live?
He had a place on Commonwealth Ave and then another place on Beacon Street.
So he wasn't that far from the Marley Ave restaurant where there was one scene on a balcony. Right? Am I right? That's the Thomas Crown affair, right?
You know what?
Who's the star of that?
Steve McQueen.
Yes, I'm pretty sure that's it. Now that room is now enclosed, but at the time it was open, and there's a scene with them. I don't know, having dinner or cocktails or coffee or something in a corner in a balcony, and that's right on that street where the Marley Ave is.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. That sounds about right.
Okay.
It might have been the art auction scene or something.
Okay.
Anyway, a lot of it the film was filmed in Boston. So,
so who did you talk to initially? Tell me about your method of getting the information.
Well, basically the U.S. Marshal Service just announced publicly, a couple months after he died, that, hey, look, we finally found Ted Conrad. He's been living for over 50 years, a life of an upstanding citizen, and in Massachusetts. And, I mean, it's pretty incredible, the fact that they finally put it together, and the fact that he got away with it for so long, and was, yeah.
Any idea how many people get away with it? Like zero, right?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like the banks these days, it's not always like an inside job. You know what I mean? You usually have like somebody who's on drugs walking in, like slipping a note, that type of thing. You know what I mean? That happens all the time.
So they indicted him. They indicted him. How long after it happened, and why? What was their cause? What made them think it was him? Just because A, the money was gone, and B, he was gone. That was it.
He was gone. Yeah.
Okay.
And then they interviewed his friends, and apparently he had been bragging to his friends like, "Oh, I could rob." You know what I mean? Like, "Oh, I could do this. I could pull this off."
So he wasn't that smart. I mean, you don't brag to your friends about crimes you're going to commit.
Yeah, but I mean, he did pull it off, though.
He did. The only way the shocking part is that he escaped being identified. I suppose back then you just pay cash when you go to the gas station and get a hotel, and and you get away with stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Like again, when I wrote two stories about this, the first story just kind of laid out what happened, and then I did a follow-up story because I got so many questions from readers being like, "How the hell did he do this? Like, how did he get a social security number? Like, how did he,
Yeah.
So it was a lot easier to do, back then, I think.
Hmm.
But yeah, he completely flew under the radar and just started a whole new life.
Can you talk a little bit about your two books? And you still have an upcoming book that is uh, the Dropkick Murphy book, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Well, I got
talk about all that.
okay, sure. So, my first book that came out a few years ago is called Boston Organized Crime. And it's mostly like it's a whole bunch of photos of crime scenes, mugshots, and I go really far back into the history of organized crime, further than I mean most other books do. So yeah, if you're into like photos, illustrated history, that type of thing, Boston Organized Crime is worth checking out. Obviously, I'm a little biased, but buy my books.
Is that the one that was, focused largely around the North End?
Yeah. So actually, there's photos from South Boston, North End. There was a lot of early mafia activity in the North End. I mean, unsurprisingly.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it covers like all over Boston. And then my second book, Gangland Boston, is kind of builds off of it. There's not as many photos in it, but there's like just a heck of a lot more information. Like for instance, like the Guston gang which was like a notorious gang from South Boston in the Prohibition era. I did like a deep dive and got as much information on just how the gang came to be. It's really fascinating, and the early mafia days too, like going back to like this late 1800s. I have a lot of information just about how the mafia was in the North End, kind of like how it built up, and yeah. So if you're into history, and or like local organized crime, Gangland Boston is worth checking out.
Do you were the old school mobsters more violent or less violent? Was it more brutal back in the old days, or did it get more brutal in the 80s?
Well, I would say I wouldn't want to be a cop around the turn of the turn of the last century. Um, because some of the stuff, I mean, police officers would get attacked a lot. You know what I mean? I'm talking like the early 1900s and stuff, leading up into Prohibition. And I mean, I was amazed, like, you know what I mean? Like, there'd be, police officers like being beat up and being shot at like all the time. And so it was like a lot of violence in the streets. At one point, it's hard to like, see it now, but Hanover Street was called like a shooting gallery because there's just so many like, you know what I mean? People getting shot and stuff.
Yeah.
Again, this is way back when, So again, it's hard to say. And talk about like, again, tough being a police officer, a detective. Back then they didn't even have IDs. You know what I mean? So it was
Yeah.
really easy to have aliases. It was really, criminals could, you change your
It was
identity.
much more of a hands-on, face-to-face deal.
Yeah, I guess.
I have a book idea for you. It could be fantastic. Maybe dumb, but probably not. And
Okay.
it's those signs at many squares in Boston, like dozens and dozens and dozens. It's
Yeah.
in memory of
Yeah.
Boston police officer Edward J. Whatchamacallit,
Yeah. Hero squares. Yeah.
who died, Hero Squares. Okay, who died in the course of duty. So go back and find the stories of those officers in those squares that were involved in the in the gang stuff, and you could probably squeeze a book out of that.
Actually, yeah, I think you're right. The Boston Police Department has a blog called bpdnews.com. And obviously, like being a reporter, we're on it all the time. And it was so cool to see. But over the past couple of years, now and again they'll do like on an anniversary of an officer, who died in the line of duty, And some of these guys are like, going back to like when they wore bobby hats, you know what I mean? Like old school.
Yeah.
But that's a good idea for a book,
You
Bradley.
could call it, Hero Squares, the story of blah, 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 blah. Hero Squares is
No,
kind of a pretty good title.
I'll look into this. Seriously.
Okay. Great. Well, I appreciate you sharing the story with us. And please, you're an interesting person. And I hope you can come on like once a month.
Yo,
And
anytime.
plug the
Seriously. I'm always working on crazy stories. I
plug the
really am.
Boston Globe. The Boston Globe is very cool to still have you. And that a lot of people aren't with them anymore, but you are, and that's a feather
right.
in their cap. Good for them. Tell the story about how we met. It's kind of, I still think of you as a young person, but you're not.
Well, I still think of you as a young person too. Like I feel like we haven't even changed.
Well, I know. So I'll give my version of
Okay.
meeting you. It was one of those festivals, right? It was like a metal festival of some kind. What was it?
Ozfest.
Ozfest. And it was Great Woods, I believe. And you were not even with the Boston Globe yet. You were working for the Tab, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And somehow you'd gotten backstage in the area where there's outdoor tent and stuff backstage at Great Woods. I call it Great Woods. I don't know really what it is. Tweeter, whatever it is. Everybody knows Great Woods. And, there's a lot of killing time at these things, waiting for shows to start, waiting for interviews to start. And you were there covering it for the Tab, and I was there working it for WBCN. And we just, there weren't many people back there. So you start hanging out and chatting, and we've been pals ever since. And that's pretty cool. Like 20 years. I tell you, the time, that 20 years went by like a rocket. I can remember the 80s kind of, but things started to get kind of generic. I don't know, from 90 to 2010, or from 2000 to now. It's just kind of one big blurb. And I don't know if it's like that for you. And then the fun thing is, when I was working at WBZ and they moved to Medford, one day I'm at the Orange Line at probably 5:20 a.m. and I see somebody vaguely familiar, but I thought, that can't be Emily. It's too early in the morning, and I'm at the Orange Line station in Medford. How would that be? But in fact, it was. And then it was kind of fun. We used to ride the rails early in the morning, about two and a half years ago, with a dude named Joe, who I still see. I don't know if he goes to the Brendan Bean sometimes, and he's a train fanatic. So that's a cool history. I won't keep you any longer, Emily, but let's keep in touch and do something as soon as you want to do it again. I'll keep it short. That way it's not a burden to you. And please feel free to share this, everyone, and I'll share it. So thanks for being with us and telling us a cool true crime story. John Graham, I don't know if you know John Graham. He says, Hero Square is a great title. Perfect. I like it.
Good job, Bradley.
All right. There you go. I'm pretty good at suggesting books. Historian Anthony Samarco recently did a book on the combat zone, and that was my idea. I said, you ought to do a book on the combat zone, and his publisher dug it. So I have a good track record.
All right. Excellent.
All right. Emily
Hey,
Sweeney.
thank you, Bradley, so much for having me on.
Yeah, Emily Sweeney, Boston Globe. We'll talk soon. Peace. We'll be clear in 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 seconds, and 1.